Now, to move to the next segment of our debate, we'll be discussing the housing market. PETRA, also known as the Preservation, Enhancement, and Transformation of Rental Assistance Act, was recently presented by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to the House of Financial Service Committee. The goals of the act are to turn existing public housing developments into mixed income communities which market rate tenants and aims attract private investment to exist public housing developments. Ruth, what are your thoughts and concerns about this new initiative?
This is definitely the most important new initiative for government funded housing within the past decade. This $350 million proposal will preserve an estimated 300,000 affordable apartments in the first year, which is a lot.
This initiative threatens the rights of the tenants, though. There's great potential that this initiative will lead to privatization of public housing, which will threaten tenants' rights as well as their rent, which is currently only 30% of their income.
The goal of this act is to preserve public housing and keep the prices manageable for generations to come. Petra does not change the ownership structure, but it changes how the public housing is funded.
Which brings up the question, how will Petra be funded? This $350 million proposal will be funded by budget cuts from other programs. The nation's 13 major federal subsidized housing programs will be converted into one huge new hybrid program with only one funding stream for the whole program. Right now, each of the 13 programs has their own budget and funding to make sure that their funding reaches goals set individually by each program. Once the funding streams are converted into one huge fund, no one will be able to tell how much funding for the poor, elderly, or the disabled have been converted to finance Petra. Another concern is that banks could foreclose and convert public housing to market rate housing. This would cause tenants to pay higher rent and lead to a drastic increase in the homeless population.
Will there be protections to prohibit units being lost due to foreclosure or bankruptcy?
In the unlikely event of bankruptcy, the form of ownership, the amount of subsidy given to the property, the amount of rent the tenants pay, and their rights and property shall remain the same.
Petra also introduces important safeguards to prevent foreclosures from happening as well. Properties will be required to submit annual financial reports and will also be subject to regular monitoring on their physical and financial conditions. And the tenant organizations will be able to draw attention to properties that are not being well managed or maintained.
Just as in, just as separate but equal was declared unconstitutional with schools in Brown versus Board of Education. Low income people should not be forced into substandard housing simply because they are low income.
The Petra Act will not only make low income housing less complex to apply for, but it will also give tenants more rights, such as the ability to move from one location to another without necessarily forfeiting their housing benefits.
So, Kyle, why is resident choice needed?
Public housing and other programs often limit resident mobility. Staying is the only option for many families to keep a roof over their heads, and this creates an ongoing line of poverty in many families. Almost half of families in public housing live in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty.
Yes, but 1 out of 5 households in the HUD's Housing Choice Voucher Guide are neighborhoods of high concentrated poverty. This limits the choices these families can have on their location of living. If a family cannot afford to live in an area of low concentrated poverty, they have a smaller chance of being able to afford their housing.
So, are there any other points that should be reflected upon regarding the new housing being built?
Yes, with new housing being built, there is a greater chance to enforce advanced environmental features. By implementing green construction, pressure on energy and water resources would be relieved.
This will also help add strong support from environmentalists. There's also a benefit in spending more money to support sustainable construction in this time of crisis. If we were to build these housing units with no concern for the environment, then maybe many opponents to this act would come forward.
My main concern is that there will be a precedent set for privatizing public facilities. The government can then privatize any public property, schools, libraries, national parks, federal buildings. Another main concern is the drastically increased homeless population. If Petra fails, millions of families will be homeless and will have nowhere to turn to.